Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this webinar on hard to count maps and the 2020 census. I am with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, which is part of the Asian Americans Advancing Justice affiliation, which includes affiliates in Atlanta, Chicago, DC, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. This webinar is recorded and we'll share a copy of the presentation and recording after the webinar, and we will have Q&A at the end. I wanted to go over a little bit of background on our census campaign, which is called Count Us in 2020. You can find all of our census resources at this website, www.countusin2020.org. This is a quick overview of a lot of the different resources that we're producing focused on the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. We're also working in partnership with Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, or EPIC, on Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander focused materials. This slide includes some background on some of the community education focused materials. So as some of you may know, we've been hosting monthly census webinars covering a variety of different topics. We've hosted webinars, 14 webinars so far, and all of those webinars are recorded, and there's also an accompanying blog that's posted to summarize the webinar content. We also have a more comprehensive community engagement and communications toolkit on Get at the Count and how community-based organizations and community leaders can reach their communities regarding the 2020 census. We also have a series of fact sheets focused on different issues, national and state fact sheets that dive into population data for each state, and also Get at the Count fact sheets, which serve as community education resources that can be used by community-based organizations and handed out at different events. And lastly, we have a new Count on Your Census podcast with new episodes coming out in the next few weeks. As I mentioned, we've had 14 census webinars so far, and we do have more planned. This is a list of the topics that we've covered so far, and we have a new one coming up focused on questionnaire assistance center guidance and also how libraries can get at the count. For recordings for all of our webinars, you can visit countusin2020.org. And here is a list of the 12 Get Out the Count fact sheets that we have produced. These are all available in English, and we do have customizable copies available where local partners and organizations can take the copies and add their own organization's logo, contact information, and other details about their Get Out the Count campaigns. These fact sheets are also translated, and I'll go over the list of the translations that are available. And as I mentioned, we do have state fact sheets available to use in your Get Out the Count campaigns. The state fact sheets include a breakdown of the Asian American and the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations in each state. I've included the example from DC here, as well as a breakdown of federal funding that goes to each place and the programs that are funded through programs that are informed by census data. And as I mentioned, we have a new podcast out, Count on Your Census. You can find the podcast on our website, and please subscribe and also share this with your networks. And lastly, these are a list of the translations that we are producing for the Get Out the Count fact sheets. All of our translations go through a professional vendor, and we also work with community partners to review the fact sheets to ensure that they're easy to understand and easy to use. And these fact sheets are available in ready-to-use PDFs, as well as customizable copies where partners can update and tailor the translations for their audiences. If you have any questions about our census campaign or resources, feel free to reach out to us at census@advancingjustice-aajc.org. And I will pass it over to Jeanine Abrams McLean, who is with Fair Count.
All righty, hello everyone. 1 second. Hi, my name is Jeanine Abrams McLean, and I am the Vice President of Fair Count, a nonprofit organization that is working to make sure that everyone is counted in the 2020 census. Today I'm going to talk about hard to count maps and the 2020 census, and this is a webinar that is done in collaboration with Fair Count and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, also in collaboration with the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Black Caucus. Here we go. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'll start off with census basics, because I know that there are people that are joining this webinar with different levels of understanding of the census. Then I will do a brief overview of Fair Count, followed by a walkthrough of the 2020 hard to count map, and then a deep dive into how Fair Count uses hard to count data to create maps for strategic planning for outreach and mobilization. So census basics. The census counts everyone living in the United States once and in the correct place. The very first census was conducted in 1790, and it is mandated by our Constitution. In addition to this mandate, the data that are collected are protected for our privacy by the Constitution. And two other things are that the census is the largest peacetime function of our government, and it is our very democracy is dependent on a fair, accurate, and complete count. Based on a recent study done by George Washington University, the 2020 census will direct nearly $1.5 trillion annually to states and counties through over 300 federal programs. These federal programs impact education. So we're talking about Pell Grants, National School Lunch Programs, Head Start programs, and programs used to improve rural education. It impacts healthcare by funding Medicaid and Medicare, public benefits such as WIC, SNAP, and CHIP. And it's also very important for community mental health services, disability assistance, and domestic violence and child abuse prevention and services. Census data also inform infrastructure and much, much more that affects our daily lives. Census data are used for highway planning and construction, for Section 8 housing, for disaster recovery, and even wildlife restoration. So it is extremely important that we get an accurate count so that the funds are fairly and equitably distributed among the states and counties. The census also guides reapportionment and redistricting. So reapportionment will occur after the 2020 census, and the seats for the House of Representatives will be determined for each state. The number that each state receives will be determined based on census data. So if we know that there are states that that are at risk of either gaining or losing a seat, and other states that could gain seats based on the census count. Census data also instructs or redistricting. So this is where state officials will redraw boundaries from political districts to school zones. So today we're talking about hard to count populations and hard to count maps. Hard to count is a term that is used by the Census Bureau to denote communities that have and populations that have not been accurately counted in the past. One of the things that we like to say at Fair Count is that communities aren't necessarily hard to count. It's just that the processes that are in place don't count certain communities well. So the hard to count communities or populations that the Census Bureau has identified are young children, highly mobile persons, racial and ethnic minorities, non-English speakers, those that have low incomes, persons experiencing homelessness, undocumented people, those who distrust the government, LGBTQ persons, those with mental or physical disabilities, and those that don't live in traditional housing. So as we approach the 2020 census, which will officially kick off in March of this year, with National Census Day being held on April 1st, there are several challenges that we're facing. One is that the census will be primarily online for the first time ever. You still will be able to complete the census via the telephone or using the paper questionnaire, but it will be primarily online for the very first time. We know that the budget for enumerators or census takers has been cut. In 2010, the Census Bureau had 39,000 questionnaire assistance centers across the nation that were stationary places where people could go to ask questions and get guidance on how to fill out their census questionnaire. In 2010 or in 2020, 0 of these have been funded, and instead the Bureau is opting for a roving response team that may not be as effective, particularly in rural areas. Another challenge is the practice of prison gerrymandering. So this is where prisoners are counted where they are incarcerated and not where they are from. And so in many cases, what happens is that resources in terms of federal funding or and also with redistricting and the redistricting process is that those numbers and fundings are shifted from the communities where people are from to primarily or to predominantly white rural areas where prisons are located. And then, but this particular practice will definitely occur in 2020, but there are lots of groups that are working to put an end to prison gerrymandering by 2030. And then last but not least is damage from the proposed citizenship question. The entire debate around this citizenship question left lots of communities, particularly immigrant communities, feeling with additional fear and distrust in the government. And several groups are working to combat that. There's also still some misinformation about or misunderstanding about whether or not the citizenship question will be on the census questionnaire. The answer to that is that it will not be on the questionnaire, even though you may still hear about it in the news. So I'm going to do a very quick overview of Fair Count, where we came from and what we do. So Fair Count was founded by Stacey Abrams. She ran for governor in the state of Georgia, and she was the first Black female major party gubernatorial nominee in the history of the United States. Our CEO is Rebecca DeHart, who is the former executive director of the Democratic Party of Georgia. And I am Jeanine Abrams McLean, the vice president. And I have over 15 years of experience. I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, but I have over 15 years of experience designing, managing, and implementing population-based studies. Our mission is that we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is committed to ensuring that every person in Georgia and the nation is seen, heard, and counted for a fair and accurate census, and we're committed to building pathways to continued civic participation. Our approach is defined as field organization, ingenuity, partnership, and hard work. Specifically in Georgia, we leverage a network of locally based trained organizers who have experience entering hard-to-count communities. We hire people that live and work there instead of parachuting people in and out of Atlanta. We develop effective digital and technological infrastructure to increase online participation and provide access within hard-to-count communities with limited internet accessibility. One of our flagship programs that we're very proud of is the fact that we are bringing internet to rural Georgia. And so at this point, we have installed internet installations and provided devices, tablets, and Chromebooks for over 60 locations across the state of Georgia. They're in churches, community centers, barber shops, shelters, some libraries, wherever we think that we can increase online participation while also providing a community resource for these communities with limited internet accessibility. And we'll be paying for the internet until the end of 2020, so even after the census, so that this will be a resource for those communities. We partner with existing complete count committees, community and faith-based leaders and organizations and other stakeholders. We support the development and dissemination of community-specific advertising and promotional materials via social media, radio, television, and local newspapers. And we're building and preparing to deploy rapid response teams to areas of need during the non-response follow-up period of the census. So this is when enumerators will be knocking on people's doors who have not participated on their own. We will be working with our partners across the state to increase participation in hard-to-count communities through enhanced localized efforts. As I said, although we are based in Georgia, we are engaged in a national effort. All of our outreach strategies and tactics are designed to be easily replicated and shared in real time with state-based partners and national organizations. And we've been building these relationships for a while, and so we're really happy about the partnerships that we have across the nation. If you'd like to learn more about our work and to gain access to some of the resources, feel free to visit faircount.org. So now I'm going to move into the hard-to-count map. So CUNY has developed the Census 2020 hard-to-count map, and so I'm going to walk through this with everyone to give you a good idea of how it works. So the Census Hard-to-Count Map is an online mapping tool developed by Stephen Romalewski and his team at the Center for Urban Research at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. The map is regularly updated with new and really cool features. One of the things that I really appreciate about Steve and his team is that they listen to the users, and they really update the map to make it much better for the users to utilize. For those of you, this will be a really quick walkthrough. For those of you who want to sort of walk along or go at a slower pace and really get in, do a deep dive, AAJC hosted a webinar last year where Steve detailed aspects of the map. And you can find a recording of the slides at the link that's provided on this slide. So the 2020 hard-to-count map allows users to prioritize hard-to-count communities for Get Out the Count campaigns. You can search by address, zip code, landmark, county, state, or legislative district. You can download data to get a detailed picture of communities that have been undercounted in the past to help guide outreach strategies. Today, I'll walk through how to use the hard-to-count map, and then I'll follow up by detailing how FairCount has used the mapping data to create FairCount zone maps that we use for strategic planning, outreach, and mobilization efforts. So using hard-to-count data, oh, sorry, I skipped it. Here we go. Great. So this is the Census 2020 hard-to-count map. First thing you'll notice is all the pretty colors. So we have purples and greens and yellows. What these colors denote are how the Census Bureau will initially contact households across the country. So anything in purple, those are households that will be contacted via the internet first mailing. So this will be a letter with a unique code inviting the household to go online and complete the census. Everything in green, those households will receive internet choice mailing. So they will get the letter to invite them to participate or to complete the census online, as well as a paper form so that they can go ahead and complete it there. And all of the areas in yellow will receive hand-delivered packets with the paper questionnaire. What I'm going to do now, so you can get an idea of what the hard-to-count areas look like, is turn off this particular layer. And so now you see reds and yellows or oranges and reds. So these colors denote the hardest to count tracts in the nation. And so the way that hard to count is defined is any tract where 73% or less of households participated in the self-response portion of the 2010 census. So these are households that participated before enumerators began knocking on doors. And so anything in yellow, 70 to 73% of households participated, and all the way to deep red, where 0 to 60% participated in the 2010 census self-response. So I'm going to walk through first. If you look here, there is this lovely search bar, and you can search by census tract, state, county, address, congressional district, and then upper and lower state legislative districts. So I'm going to first start by searching for my favorite state. I live in Georgia. Don't tell Mississippi that, because I'm from Mississippi. That was where I was born. But first I need to change this to state, and then I will enter Georgia. All right. And here we are. So as you can see, Georgia has a lot of hard to count communities scattered throughout the state, primarily in middle and south Georgia. If you look over to the left of the screen, there is a lot of information that will give you an overview of what the issues that Georgia is facing, or whatever state that you choose to look at. So the map gives you information about the population size, how many households are in the state, and how many people live in group quarters. Group quarters include dorms, nursing homes, as well as prisons. The other thing that you can look at are these tabs for the state. So you can look at, again, how the Bureau will contact each household. You can look at self-response rates, internet access, at-risk populations, and also census contacts, which are organizations within each state that are working to make sure that everyone is counted. So I'll just click on at-risk populations. And so there are several, again, these are the hard to count populations. So people of color, children under 5, renters, crowded households, single parent households, immigrants, low income populations, people with limited English proficiency, and those living in multiple family housing. So if we look at people of color, it then gives you a breakdown of the demographics of the state. So this is at the state level. So we know that 9% of Georgia's population is Hispanic, 33% Black, 4% Asian, 1% American Indian or Alaska Native. And so I encourage you, as you go through your, look at your respective states, to go through all of these tabs to really get an idea and an understanding of some of the of what your state looks like. So I'm going to go back to the search bar, and I'm going to look at things from a county level. So I'm going to stay in Georgia, and I'm going to look at Stewart County, which is one of our hardest to count counties in Georgia. And so as you can see, it pulls up Stewart County. There are only 2 census tracts, or that the 2 tracts for the entire county that the Census Bureau has denoted or delimited. And so we have the larger tract here in red, as well as this yellow tract on the right-hand side. If you go to map overlays, and this is for particularly important for those of you who are doing on the ground organizing, there are several different layers that you can add. One of the ones that we use very often is the location of libraries, because libraries are places where people can utilize, can gain internet access if they have it available. But again, I encourage you to toggle on and off all of these different layers. So again, if you go to the left side, you can get detailed information about particular counties. So we know, again, how many people live in Stewart County, how they are going to be getting, how they're going to, get their census information. Either we know that 40% of Stewart County will have census packets hand delivered to them. We can also go down to our details and look at internet access. So one of the issues with Stewart County is that almost 50% of the households in this county either have no internet subscription or dial-up only. And so you can read through for each county to get a better understanding of internet access, as well as some of the other categories that I mentioned. And one last thing I'll do for this is how they're going to contact. So if you go back to contact strategies, you can find the toggle to figure out how the Census Bureau will contact people within your county. So everything highlighted in yellow will be hand delivered, and everyone else in Stewart County will get the internet choice option. All right, and the last thing I'm going to search here is U.S. Congressional District. So I live in DeKalb County, and my representative is Lucy McBath. And so, and I'll turn off I'll leave the libraries on. And 1 second, I'll turn that off. So here you can look at congressional districts. You can also do this at the state level for upper and lower seats, but you can get an idea of in your particular district where the hardest to count areas and communities and tracts are. And so, and then you can also, when you look on the left-hand side, get a little bit more information about these hard to count tracts. So one of the really cool things that the team from CUNY has implemented recently is their advanced search options. And so this option is really cool because you can go and put in a county. So I'll put in Stewart County, Georgia, and you can pull out information, whether it's going to be the number of or the percentage of. I'll do number. So say I wanted to know how many people in Stewart County were Hispanic or Latino. And so what I can do is I'll say, give me the number of people greater than, let's see, 1. So how many census tracts have more than one Hispanic or Latino person living there? And so it will highlight both the tracts, but then you have this option to download. So remember, there are only 2 tracts in Stewart County. You can download an Excel file that will allow you to take a deeper look at the data, or a closer look at the data. So if we look here, we have both tracts for Stewart County. We know that in the first tract, there are only 5 people who identify as Hispanic or Latino. And then in the second tract, almost 1,200. And so when you get these data, you're actually able to, if we scroll over, you can see for several different ethnicities. You can also look at children, the number of children under the age of 5 in each tract, and then just a lot more information that I think is very useful when it comes to figuring out how you're going to your strategies for getting these populations to participate in the census. And so I encourage you to utilize some of this and to really look at the data. It has also information about internet connectivity. And Stewart County, I did that for simplicity, but if I were to go to DeKalb County, which is where I live, in Tucker, Georgia, near Atlanta, if I leave the same criteria, then there are 141 tracts. But if I change it to more than 1,000 people, then we get remarkably fewer. And so it helps you to really refine where you want to really focus your efforts for particular groups of concern. And the very last thing for this map, so I'm going to close this and then go back to just looking at the state. I'll click on Georgia. All right, so they've also provided several things that you can download at several different levels, but I'll just do it for the state. Hold on, I just want the state. There we go. Click on the map. There we go. So you can download a PDF that will show you how the Census Bureau will initially contact every household in your state. You can also download a map in a PDF version of all of the hard to count communities and tracts in your state. And then when you click on tracked data, this gives you a file with every single tract in your state. So for Georgia, there are, you know, over 1,900 tracts, but you can look at them based on county or, yeah, that's it. But all of it, I don't think you should go through every single one, but it can be a little tedious, which is why the search engine is a lot better, so that you can really fine tune what you want to look at. So I'm going to stop there, but I will answer any questions that you have at the end of the webinar. And now I'm going to talk about how we utilize, at Fair Count, how we utilize these maps for strategic planning. So Georgia has a population of about 10 million people, and approximately 22% of those people live in areas considered hard to count by the Census Bureau. Approximately 19% of Georgia households reported either no internet subscriptions or dial-up only in 2016. And so to really facilitate the development of strategic action plans, we divided Georgia's 159 counties into 6 fair count zones. These zones, when you look at the purple, that means that over 76% of the population in that particular county lives in a hard to count neighborhood. And so anything with a whole lot of purple is very, very hard to count. And zone 4 is actually our hardest to count county, and that's where we start all of our efforts. So our mapping strategy, as I said, we define tiers of hard to count counties based on the percent of the population that lives in hard to count neighborhoods, with purple being essentially the worst. We then define zones. So this is, we have a very robust field team of organizers. And so this was designed, these zones were designed so that we could have a team within each zone, living and working in those zones, but also building relationships with community, faith, and any sort of leader and organization within that particular zone. After we divide, and we tried to make sure that each zone had roughly the same number of both counties as well as the populations represented by each zone. And I'll show you a map of Texas in a little bit, and you'll see that it's not the easiest thing to do, especially when there are lots of metropolitan areas. So once we do this, we've sort of defined these tiers, we overlay additional information. So the little diamonds that you see here are the locations of census area offices where the Census Bureau will be located around the state. One of the things you can see for Georgia is that out of the 8 offices that we have, 5 of them are in the metro Atlanta area, and then the other 3 are in the hardest to count parts of the state. And so that can be a bit of an issue for us, and it is. We also look at, again, the number of the percentage of households with limited or no internet access, the percentage of people of color. We also looked at the number of religious congregations based on the 2010 religious census, which is not done by the government, but it's done by a nonprofit. But it's one of the closest approximations that we have for the location and number of religious organizations in the United States. So this is Zone 4. This is Stewart County that I brought up before. And so we do a pretty good breakdown of each zone. So we give them a priority level. Again, this is one of our hardest to count counties, and so it has a priority level of high. There are 29 counties in this zone. We also define the number of people living in hard to count neighborhoods within the zone, the number of people of color, and then we go into further breakdowns of demographic data for race. We identify how many children under 5, another hard to count group, renters, number of immigrants, people with limited English proficiency. And then we top it off with the number of congregations that are estimated to be just within the zone, as well as the number of adherents or attendees of these congregations. The other thing you'll notice is over here, there are 3 counties within the zone that are in gray. And so these are what we call at-risk, non-hard-to-count counties. So anything in white has, that means that less than 1% of the population lives in a hard-to-count neighborhood. And so Harris County and these 3 counties meet that criteria, those criteria. The difference between for these counties is that over 25% of the population has no access to internet, combined with over 25% of the population being composed of people of color. And so the reason we call these at-risk, non-hard-to-count counties is because the numbers that are used to identify hard-to-count counties are based on 2010 census participation. And again, remember that this is the first time that the census will be done primarily online. And so there is a chance that the combination of having at-risk populations defined as people of color, combined with limited access to internet, could result in an undercount of these areas. And so even though they're not hard to count, we don't want to lose any ground that we make up by getting increased participation from hard to count communities by ignoring those areas that seem like they might be safe. And so that's why we're working in those counties. So we identify our at-risk, non-hard to count counties. Again, we prioritize the zones. And then for our field team, we provide detailed county profiles. So for each county, when our field staff are organizing, we provide them with the names of cities, towns, census designated areas. We provide county-specific demographic data, library locations, the number of religious congregations and adherents, state and congressional information, the number of, and also the details for internet access, whether it's no internet, dial-up only, mobile phone only, or satellite. So we try to give them as much data as they possibly can have when they go into these counties to start doing deep dive organizing. So these maps, after these maps were created, we began a partnership with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation called Black America Counts. And so this particular campaign is using targeted census mapping, like I just described, to help guide outreach and mobilization efforts in hard to count communities across the nation, particularly Black and Latinx communities. And so the idea is that if there is a county in North Carolina that has a very similar profile in terms of demographics, how hard it is to count, as well as some other criteria, as one of the counties that we work with in Georgia, the idea is that we can then export best practices to that county and to the people that are on the ground in that county. So if this is a rural county where you need to have organizers talking to people and doing deep dive organizing, then we will send out best practices and training for that. If it is an urban, or a metropolitan area where you're going to get a really good bang for your buck through advertising on the radio or television, then we'll share those strategies as well. So as a part of this, in conjunction with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and students from the University of California, DC campus, we are creating these maps, these zoned maps for every single state. And so this is Texas, which has a ridiculous number of counties. I can't remember the exact number right now, but way more than Georgia. And so what we did was, again, identified, created the tiers, but then broke the state up into 10 zones. So what I tried to do was, again, keep a close number of counties for each one, because you'll have a team of people. If they choose to use the methods that we're using, you'll have a team of people that need to travel within a particular area on a regular basis. We've identified the number of hard to count counties, the number of at-risk counties in each of the 10 zones, total population, the number of people living in hard to count neighborhoods, and then broken it down, Black, Hispanic, and Asian residents. And then also the number of counties where over 25% of households have limited or no internet access. And you see that Texas is huge. I used to live in Austin, but Texas is just a really, really big state. And so you'll see that some of the total population numbers are big, but that's because there are so many metropolitan areas. I think almost all of the zones, or most of the zones, have at least one metropolitan area included. And so we're finishing up and wrapping up getting the maps completed for all 50 states, and hopefully they'll be available for usage pretty soon. The last thing I'm going to say is I like to make sure that everybody has a charge. To get a complete count in the census is going to take work from everyone. And so here are some things that you can do. You can join or even start a complete count committee. There's nothing, you don't have to fill out any paperwork. You just, there are resources. You can go to the Census Bureau. You can also go to Fair Count to learn more about how to start a complete count committee, and a lot of other organizations. I'm sure AAJC has tons of information about how to start a complete count committee. You can volunteer as what we call count captains. So these are lead volunteers to make sure that your neighborhoods, places of worship, sports teams, your jobs that everyone there is counted and committed to participating in the census. You can also share information about job opportunities at the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau has to recruit, I think, nearly 2 million people to try to fill 500,000 enumerator positions for the 2020 census. And so if you're over 18 or you know people that are over 18, I encourage you to apply for jobs. I like to call it the census side hustle. So even if you're a college student or know a college student that needs a job, then please encourage them to apply. You can also share information about the 2020 census on your social media platforms. Social media is going to be a big driver of getting the message out, but also a big driver of combating misinformation that we know is going to negatively or potentially negatively impact the census. And so one way to combat bad information is to consistently put out good information. And then you can learn more and stay informed by signing up at faircount.org. And then do everything you can to spread the word about the 2020 census, because if you are not counted, you simply will not count. And so I am done, and I think we are ready for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jeanine. So we are going to get started with Q&A, and to submit a question, you can either raise your hand on GoToWebinar to have your line unmuted so you can ask the question, or you can type your question into the chat box or the questions box. And again, this webinar is recorded, so we'll be sure to share a recording with everyone who's on right now after the webinar. And we'll hold for a few seconds so people can get their questions in. It looks like at this time there aren't any questions, so we will go ahead and end the webinar. But if you have any questions after the webinar ends, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. Oh, it looks like we do have a question. And this question is from Christina. What is the Fair Count doing to ensure that homeless people are counted, whether they live in the shelter or on the streets?
So the Census Bureau has a separate program that is used to make sure that homeless populations are counted. And so they have, they work with community leaders who know whether they're, our family, if there's a family living in their car on Main Street, if there's a group of men that live behind, a gas station. They are talking to people on the ground. If they're, for instance, in Austin, if there is a church service that underneath the bridge in downtown Austin where homeless people congregate on Sundays to receive aid, then they'll be aware of that and meet the people where they are. And so there is a separate operation that is used to make sure that homeless populations are counted. One thing I will say is that a lot of times we think of homelessness as living on the streets or living in shelters, but there are a lot of people that count, they hop from house to house or couch to couch, couch surfing. And so one of the things that we have to be aware of and that we can tell people is that if you have someone that is living in your home that is couch surfing, if they're on your couch when you're filling out your census, count them in your household. These are things that people need to know. And so, yes, make sure that you count everybody.
Thank you. And we have another question, and this is from Stephanie. Jeanine, could you repeat the state maps Fair Count will be producing soon per state?
We're doing them for all 50 states. And I can't remember the song so that I can say Alabama, Alaska, Arizona. Sorry, but we'll be doing them for all 50 states.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have no further questions at this time. Thank you, Jeanine, for your presentation and walking us through the mapping tool. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this webinar. You will receive a copy of the presentation recording soon. Thank you.